products are not designed with a marketer's perspective, like as part of the crucial or making decisions
Mm-hmm.
from the very beginning. Most it's done by the
Mm-hmm.
product or the dev or the tech team, and marketing only gets to be involved once it's mostly done. And then they're like, okay, now you got to sell it.
I'm speaking with Carter Fowler, the CEO and co founder of Totem, a tech startup creating a safer and more immersive experience for live events worldwide. He comes from a long line of professional musicians. In 2018, a selection of his writing was archived by the U.S Library of Congress in their American Music Journalism archives. Hi, Carter. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank
It's
you,
great
Vish.
to have you. We met at
Correct.
South by Southwest. I saw you pitch at one of the investors' side event, and I was just blown away by the product and the pitch. But for the audience, if you want to share a bit about your background and what Totem is.
Yes. Yeah, I can do that. And I just want to like go back to that South by Southwest moment with you for a second too, because that was just one of the most beautiful, emotional, intense, stressful, exciting, rewarding, just like all of the feelings, weeks that I have had in my entire life. And I think once we get a little bit more into the
Mm.
story and like the early stages of Totem and how it led into South by Southwest and how much things changed in the month leading up to South by Southwest for
Yeah.
the company, everybody will probably understand all of those emotions. But yeah, we can go a little further
Yeah.
back to I guess where the story began, the roots, right? Um, the roots, yes.
Yeah. Do.
So I grew up, my two parents, my mother's a career musician, and my father was a serial entrepreneur. And, my mother, I grew up always watching her. She has multiple degrees in music performance, and it always came easily to me as well. So I've spent my whole
Mm.
life in and out of performances, learning instruments, all number of things. I used to compete vocally, and I used to compete in fiddle competitions as a teenager, like all around the Southeast. I almost majored in vocal performance in
Mm.
college at Florida State University. Came very, very close before I ended up doing a total pivot to economics. Um, so music has been a
Oh,
huge
wow.
part of my entire life from the very beginning. And on the other side, my father,
Mm-hmm.
he was a serial entrepreneur. He's the kind of guy, none of his businesses ever really achieved the heights that he hoped for them, but that never deterred him. And he was always ready with another idea. And that's just kind of the guy that he will be his entire life. So, growing up in Georgia with those parents, obviously, it felt like, you know, music was just every single day a way of life, and also my father just drilling into me the importance of leverage and this concept. When I was younger, my he would pay me $1 a page to read certain books out loud to him. I did not get to pick the book. It was
Mm.
he got to pick the book. So let's say like a classic was like Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Any of these kind of like personal professional development books. We had this great
Mm-hmm.
agreement, and I know it probably sounds pretty amazing from where we're sitting right now, but it actually wasn't as sweet a deal as you would expect, because of course it takes a little while to read through those pages, especially when the person you're reading to always wants to stop you and talk through the content on the page after each page. So what sounded like a very sweet deal at the beginning definitely took a little bit longer, but I had a lot of these concepts ingrained in me from an early age. Um, yeah,
That's a
so
smart trick. Yeah. But I will use
yeah,
on
yeah,
my son
exactly.
for sure.
Uh, it was really, really valuable, and so it felt like I tried to find a way and a place to kind of bring these two things together. I started my very first company, which was, surprise, all about the love of music. It was a media platform called Central Sauce. We had contributors all over the world in over 11 different time zones, 7 different countries. We had a podcast, a virtual music festival series during COVID. We were really known for our
Mm.
deep dive kind of investigative journalism and inside the concert, like bringing people from around the world into the experience of seeing these artists live. That was really the core of the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Central Sauce was also, I mean, this might sound kind of wild now with everything in context from with Totem, but Central Sauce also produced what I probably claim is my most proud professional accomplishment, which was a piece of my music journalism at Central Sauce getting selected for being archived
Mm.
by the U.S. Library of Congress for their American music archives. So Central Sauce, in many ways, was very exciting and very successful, but in some other ways, not so much. It's tough these days, especially post 2010s, kind of after the blog era, to really make it financially sustainable with a media company there. And we kind of
Yeah.
ran on principle with the passion on we wouldn't run ads and made a lot of other kind of philosophical stands on principle that gathered a lot of people to the cause and made people excited to be associated with the brand, but it also just made it a little bit more difficult to push beyond a project that could pay our contributors somewhat for their work. So
Mm.
upon like learning those lessons and moving into my next chapter, I began doing go-to-market consulting for startups. And that made a lot of sense at the time because of my background in fundraising, my background in marketing, and then my whole experience building a brand from the ground up with Central Sauce and doing all the brand design and strategy and everything there. And so I was working in go-to-market for startups
Mm.
for several years before I met my co-founder Chase when we were consulting on a project together. So yeah, during that time, during the go-to-market, I spent a lot of time in software, specifically with Web3 was a
Mm-hmm.
big part of my early career and doing go-to-market strategy. I made the transition into hardware and electronics just in the past year and a half or so, and it was so refreshing to have something that was real. You could actually hold, you could take a photo of, you could
Mm.
interact with. It made a big difference. So um, yeah, that's just a little bit of background that kind of led us up to that seed taking root point.
Mm. And so, when did you decide to take a shift from, doing this
Mm-hmm.
go to market consulting to this other music
Central
startup?
Sauce.
What was the name? Sorry, I'm blank. So Central
Yes, it
Sauce was before
was.
the go to
Yeah.
market
So
gig
Central
or after
Sauce, I
go to
learned a
market?
few lessons from that. The biggest being,
Hmm.
an area of naivety for me at the time because I was approaching that business like a marketer. And so my perspective was if we build
Hmm.
a big, dedicated, excited audience, then we can figure out how to monetize that audience later. We'll build the audience first and we'll figure it out.
Hmm.
Um, Turns
Yeah.
out, and I realize this, I understand it even now, or better now than ever before, because we deal with so many content creators and influencers now through Totem. It is much harder to monetize an audience than you
Yeah.
would think, than it sounds. Uh, so,
Yeah.
that was my big lesson from Central Sauce was like, you can't build the audience and then expect to monetize it afterward. You have to come into it with the
Yeah.
monetization strategy in mind. So so my next shift was okay. What is something that I uniquely can do from everything that I have learned throughout my career at this point, and an area that I'm passionate about, which is entrepreneurship. Um, so
Mhm.
what is something that I can do with all of that, and that is definitely worth someone paying for right up front? That was the shift that I made going into go to
Mm.
market consulting. And then, throughout my time doing go to market consulting, I realized that, you know, deploying services is a tough thing as well to scale. And so I was always in this never ending battle of
Yeah.
trying to productize the services I was doing and began to realize that, man, it would just be really great to just
Mm.
actually have a product. to work on rather than trying to productize all kind of non-product things. Yeah.
The monetization of audience, of course, is harder, but if you build an audience that is your eventual ICP, then there might be a
Yeah.
possibility of monetizing it. But yeah, I totally agree. It's hard to monetize if the
And I mean,
ICPs
you're
don't
getting at something in
match.
just the concept of an ICP, right? And so you're going into it with a monetization
Hmm.
strategy in
Hmm.
mind, even if you are building the audience first.
Yeah,
And so that's even a step
yeah,
further than where I was at with my first business.
yeah.
And I was actually recently listening to recently reading a book about a pretty successful businessman here in America, um, and I read a
Hmm.
little bit during the intro of advice that he got from his father, and it has really stuck with me, which was, "I really hope that your first business fails. Otherwise, you'll think you're a lot smarter than you are."
Yeah,
you know and in some ways, like, man, it was
spot
hard
on.
to take that loss on the chin, like when the day that I realized like I needed to move on from Central Sauce because it was my baby. I loved it so much, but in many ways I think that it was a valuable
Yeah.
thing for that exact reason.
Most first businesses fail. That advice is spot on. At the same time, it's not hope.
Yeah.
99% of the time, that's what happens. Either that or you end up pivoting, which is
Hmm.
in a way failure. So you met Chase at a GTM gig. How did you guys identify a product and when did you
Yeah, I
guys
can
decide to
take you
take that
back to
leap?
those days. So Chase and I met. We were both consulting for a consumer electronics product, a startup that was developing that product. Chase was leading
Mm,
all of the product development, and I was leading all of the go to market.
mm,
Chase has a pretty extensive background in product and especially R&D. He played an important role as the original R&D engineer for the Scrub Daddy product line. If you know those yellow sponges with the smiley face that everybody's obsessed with these days. So
yep.
yeah, we have our whole office is filled with with Scrub Daddy sponges because we're all just so proud of Chase and that early win that he had in his career, right? So I met Chase and was immediately
Mm,
struck. I was like, man, I think this guy is one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in a specific way that is different from many of the other people in my network.
yeah.
His focus, his work ethic, and just his sheer like cerebral intellect were really impressive to me and almost intimidating at times too. And
Mm,
so, we began working on it. I joined that startup a little more closely than most others that I did. It wasn't so much a project. I was actually like basically their head of marketing as they went to market. And the main reason was because of Chase. It wasn't the
mm,
founder of that company or anything, but with Chase, I was like, if this guy is so wickedly intelligent that if he's on board here, then it's got to be worth my time. I just never had an opportunity to work so
mm,
closely with someone like that before. And Chase and I, initially were very, very different people. Chase is an engineer through
mm,
and through, and he loves inventing and like making art. He really views himself as an artist and takes that very seriously. And we're very different at face value and personality types. As we like to say, I specialize in making friends at festivals, and Chase specializes in getting
mm,
lost at festivals. So, we're just like a very different personality types off the bat, but one thing we share is a sense of humor. And that's where it began. And then through
mm,
that, we began to understand that we both have a really intense dedication to design and a designer's mind. And we began to really appreciate each other's thoughtfulness in approaching design. There were so many little details of the actual product that Chase would think through so deeply, and no one would even care about or consider, including the founder of the startup. And he saw that I approach things the
mm,
exact same way when designing a brand or a website or any kind of go to market assets along those lines. So we began to build a lot of mutual respect. And during that, or one day after work, when we had kind of wrapped up the day there consulting for that startup, Chase was just walking me through all of these little um, ideas and little gadgets and things that he had come up with over the years. Because Chase is one of those guys, you may have a couple of these in your own life, where he just hears all the time from people, man, this is so cool. You should sell it. You would make a lot of money. And
Yeah.
Chase's response to those people was always, I think it's a lot harder to commercialize a product than you think it is. And I don't know how to do it. Do you? And they would always be like, well,
Yeah.
no, but it can't be that hard. And he's like, yeah, I think, I don't think you know what you're talking about. So, in many ways, Chase had been looking for someone like me
Yeah.
for a long time. And I've been looking for someone like Chase for a long time. As we mentioned with Central Sauce and all those others, like I had this whole desire to build a product, but that's just not my core skill set, man. Like early in my 20s, I tried to learn how to code. I really did. I put in hours and hours, and it just did not come easily to me. And that was really disappointing for me. But like, I
Mm-hmm.
just recognized how important it was to be able to build, and also recognized that that just wasn't my skill set. And so Chase and I had been looking for someone to kind of fill those gaps for a long time. And that day after work, he was walking me through some of these ideas that he'd had over the years. One being, tiny little micro drones the size of a silver dollar that turn on when you just throw them in the air and hover. And this one is my favorite and really interesting. And also, I still don't really understand how it works. Like a little wand like apparatus that you can use to ignite or deignite a normal wax and wick candle from across the room. You can even dim them with it. I don't really understand how it works. Something to do with plasma. This is just like the kind of shit that Chase comes up with, but I've seen it myself. But as he was walking me through all of this, he came up with this. He brought this concept to me because um, Chase had gone to his very first music festival in 2019, which was EDC Orlando. There are about 120,000 people there. And within the first 30 minutes of arriving, his phone was stolen from him. And anyone who's been to one of these festivals or big crowd events, this is not a surprising or even remotely novel story. This happens all the time. And
Yeah.
then, within an hour or two, he'd gone with just a single friend. And this was his first ever festival, remember? And, Chase is like an engineer through and through. He's not the guy who just makes friends everywhere, from strangers at festival all day long. A couple hours after that, just lost sight of his friend in the crowd for a
Yeah.
few minutes, and that was it. Chase was alone at EDC Orlando among over 100,000 people for his very first music festival on day one.
Oh.
And something about Chase is that Chase refuses to believe in unsolvable problems. In fact, the more difficult it is, the more challenging or the more excited he gets about it. He's the kind of guy who loves being given a task of like, this thing that exists, make it as small as humanly possible. So most of us would be either worrying and stressing at the festival or just totally cutting free and like losing our sense of self in the anonymity of the crowds. Chase, meanwhile, was thinking in his head, how can we solve this problem? Because this cannot be uncommon. And he looked around and saw in the crowd all of these
Hmm.
people wearing, you know, pouring so much attention into their outfits and their jewelry and what they would wear because everybody, wearing things that glow and light up with the music because everybody wants to feel and
Yep.
look like they are part of the performance itself, you know. And while he was looking
Yep.
around at this, he came up with this idea for a friend finding bracelet. And that was the original concept for Totem. And it was just like an LED bracelet that goes around the wrist and a light rotates around the bracelet and points in the direction of the bracelet that it's bonded with. And so he told me this story as we were sitting in the office here in Chattanooga. And I told him, I was like, hold the phone. So are you telling me that's fine. Hold the phone. There's the celebration moment, the epiphany. Hold the phone. Are you telling me you know how to make one of these bracelets that could help you find your friend in the crowds without any cell service or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or anything? He's like, yeah, I've already spec'd it out in my head. I know exactly how it would work. And I was like, I don't need to hear any other ideas from you because that is brilliant. And I would buy that in a heartbeat if it was marketed and designed the right way. And I think a lot of other people too, because Chase, I know that was your first ever music festival. You haven't been to many, but I've been to a bunch. And I can think of so many times where that would have come
Mm.
clutch and saved my bacon, you know? And so we agreed. I was like, once we're done with this project that we're working on, I would love to take that to market with you. And he said that would be great. And so, at the time it felt kind of crazy and harebrained, but that was, last summer. I just met him in the last few months or so, but we did have that
Yeah.
good chemistry. And so thus the agreement to work on Totem together was made.
That is such a brilliant story. I mean, so many people have such a hard time finding co founders. A lot of founding
Mm-hmm.
teams actually disintegrate. You finding someone who's such a great match, both not only in terms of skill set, but the mission and the goal. Yeah, very
Yeah, I agree. I
serendipitous, I
mean,
must
we
say.
both talk about it all the time, and we genuinely changed each other's lives. That's something that we're both really, really grateful for and mindful of. Because I know I mentioned that this we care so much about how things look and feel and make people look and make people feel. Um, and that was the thing that really made it so possible for us to get to where we are. Because during the early days, those early months when there weren't any investors who would give us a time of day. We had less than 100 followers on any platform. No one cared. If we could ever have a conversation with anybody about what we were trying to build, they would just say, that's dumb. It needs to be an app. No one wants a piece of hardware. It just needs to be an app. And so during all those early days, our love of just the actual process of design and the actual process of making something beautiful, I think is really what kept us together. Because let me tell you, I mean, you see the crystal here on this totem in my chest. We must have spent over 100 hours, the two of us,
Yep.
just designing the crystal specifically. And
Hmm.
that is, I think, a really important part because most products are not designed with a marketer's perspective, like as part of the crucial or making decisions
Mm-hmm.
from the very beginning. Most it's done by the
Mm-hmm.
product or the dev or the tech team, and marketing only gets to be involved once it's mostly done. And then they're like, okay, now you got to sell it. But the ability to be involved in the
Yep.
design decisions from the very beginning made it so that we could ensure that this thing would be something that could spread quickly and largely sell itself because we weren't expecting to have any funds or any budget. We knew we were expecting to have to bootstrap, and thus we knew we
Hmm.
had to make something beautiful that would be easy to sell and would practically sell itself.
And so, how did it convert from a bracelet to a
Yeah, well,
neck
so
piece?
we worked through a lot of versions of that bracelet. We made the pivot for a couple of reasons. The first and most basic, after we'd worked through, the concept with the bracelet, the first most basic reason was purely a user experience reason, which is once we were actually testing and using it, if you were to have this bracelet on your wrist, how would you hold your arm when you were trying to find someone? You'd either maybe pick it up like this or hold it like this. And then when you're walking toward the person, that light would always be on the opposite side of your wrist. So you couldn't keep eyes on the light. And
Hmm.
so that was like the first most basic reason. But the bigger, compelling reason was something that I had learned from my years of doing go to market, which is the more you can lean on something that people already know and understand when you're bringing new technology to market, the easier it will be. And so, talking through it, we realized that really what we're talking about here is it essentially is like a compass. It's just like a friend finding compass. It's instead of a normal compass that points you to an objective place like north, this is a compass that points you to a subjective place. It's more like Captain Jack Sparrow's compass. It points you to what you want most in the world, as long as that's the people that you love. So as we were talking through this whole concept, I realized that, if we just really opted to make it actually look and feel like a compass, but keep the beauty and the eye, making it like the intention of making it like jewelry, then it would be much easier to explain to people. Because if you think about it, if it was the bracelet, the simplest way to explain it to someone, I think maybe would have been about 7 to 10 words. Maybe like a friend finding bracelet that, peer to peer, like we could go through some language. After a while, we could winnow it down pretty narrow, but still there's a little bit more explanation that's required, right? But the second we opted for this compass form factor, it became very easy because then we could just call it a friend finding compass. And everybody in the world knows exactly what a
Yeah.
compass is. And so we don't have to explain that part whatsoever. All we have to do is just the signifier of the friend finding. So that was kind of the story of how we opted to
Mm.
change the form factor, but then bringing the crystal inside of it and making it kind of look like a compass in that way, but also look like jewelry. And then, of course, bringing the T for totem inside of that crystal. We have a lot of aspects of kind of this infinity mirror concept within the design that we spent so much time working on, because during those early days when we were designing, spending all those hours on the crystal and just how it would look and how it would feel, we were also spending all that time on the actual brand itself to make it truly reflect the product.
So for the initial days between the bracelet and even it taking this form factor, if I remember our conversation, there was a lull. You were trying to do things, but things were not moving. How did you achieve that momentum and virality almost, right? If I remember correctly, things went really crazy right before South by
Yes.
Southwest.
Well, probably the place to go is why we signed up for South by Southwest, or I should say applied for South by Southwest in the first place. We applied for South by Southwest
Hmm.
last October, and like about 1 month into
Mm-hmm.
working on Totem, because in my mind, South by Southwest was going to be what exposed us to the world. And that was going to be our coming out party. And it seemed like the perfect place for us because it's the world's largest conference all about tech and music, like coming together. And so it seemed like such a natural fit for us. And I was like, it will help us so much to be there and just be associated with the brand. And even if nothing comes of it, but we just take photos of ourselves there and could say that we were there, it'll be a huge win. And so that was our mentality applying for South by Southwest. We were hoping that South by Southwest would give us the relevance and the credibility in last fall. When we applied, we had fewer than 250 followers on social media, and we had maybe 55, 60
Mm-hmm.
subscribers on our email list. So
Mm-hmm.
we were just building and building over the next few months to be ready for South by Southwest. That was the big, big moment. And so about a month beforehand, I was looking at our website and like, okay, we need to like get this ready for South by Southwest. There are going to be a lot of huge companies there, very well-funded startups. So in the process of getting ready for South by, I started making a lot more content, especially for our homepage video and whatnot. And so then one fateful night in February, I believe it was February 19th, it was a Friday night. I had spent that whole day making myself, like producing this video for our homepage, kind of a trailer to make it exciting and give some people something to watch at South by Southwest. And I took one little clip of that and shared it on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram pretty thoughtlessly that night. No ad spin behind it or anything. Just threw it up. It was like 8 p.m. on a Friday. Didn't even really put that much thought into the caption. On the screen, I just used that phrase that I told you about, friend finding compass for festivals, and posted it that night and went to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, I woke up or slept in, woke up, had a leisurely start to the day, didn't even check anything because, again, at this point, we just had like a couple hundred followers on social. Like nothing was ever happening crazily. I didn't even look at my phone for the first few hours. And then when
Yep.
I did, probably about 1 p.m., I had never seen anything like it. And that moment, everything changed, and I could hardly sleep for about a week and a half. I think I got max about 4 hours of sleep from there. I lost about 16 pounds over 2 weeks, which was tough because I had been working very hard to put on those like 20 pounds over the previous year. Very hard. And yeah, it came off right
Yep.
away. And that was all because this little reel had gotten shared all over the world so quickly. That very first, or just that first
Mm.
maybe 12 hours, maybe 16 hours, it had already hit about 8 million plays and 100,000 shares. And it just started to
Wow.
accelerate from there. And, our notifications are full, like getting literally hundreds of DMs an hour, way more so than you could possibly respond to. I think right now that reel today has about 30,000 comments on it, maybe more. And so, with this just
Wow.
email requests were pouring in, and Chase and I were just a two-man team. I was the whole marketing department and doing
Yeah.
everything to like set up the company. And all of a sudden, we had a global
Yeah.
audience. I really can't put into words effectively enough how exciting and terrifying and stressful that was, because all of a sudden people from all over the world care so much, and people are, posting threads about it on Reddit, trying to figure it out, doing like investigative journalism on who these founders are, like looking through all my past posts on social media, just like doing whatever they can to get info on it, because we were so early stage. We didn't even have an FAQ up on the website yet. That's how early, like that was a plan for next week, because we just need to have it ready for South by Southwest. Thank God that we'd gotten our wait list up on the website 2 days before that went viral, which was from
That was lucky.
advice from
Yeah.
a friend of mine named Mo Sai. Shout out to you, Mo. Thank you. He's an angel investor and just big tech entrepreneur. He works at Google right now. Um, but yeah, he had
Good
encouraged me to
advice,
put up
man.
that wait list just a few days before the viral moment, and thank God, because that really helped us capitalize on that wave. From there, everything changed. That was
Yeah.
3 weeks before South by Southwest. So the moment, or like our state coming into South by Southwest versus when we applied to South by Southwest, was totally different. Going into South by Southwest, all of a sudden we had over 2 million in pre-sales. We had over 50,000 people on the wait list. Our email list had grown from the 55 when we applied to over 12,000 people on the mailing list. And our socials had obviously like shot up as well, particularly Instagram. We went from 250 followers to maybe about 40,000 followers in a week. So during all that time, obviously it's a crazy thing to manage that size of audience. And I almost couldn't even remember that we were going to South by
Mhm.
Southwest. Because how do you deal with all this? It's way too much for one person. When you're getting that level of DMs and that level of comments, it's very, very difficult to really remember that these are truly human beings around the world. It just looks like handles and numbers.
Yep.
So that's a big reason why South by Southwest was such an emotional experience, like we were talking about earlier, because that was our first time actually getting to see people in person, getting to share it with them, put it around people's necks.
Hmm.
And that was such a healing, therapeutic experience, because previous to that, it was just so big, but not real at all. It all existed only on screen.
And so before the viral moment, you not only had a wait list, you also had a pre-sales page.
Yeah, so
How did
waitlist,
the
when I say
pre-sales happen?
pre-sales, that's specifically around like the waitlist. So it was a little bit more mature than a waitlist. It wasn't just sign up to wait. It was also like your name, your email, and here's the
Okay.
pricing. How many totems do you want to reserve? You know? So it was specifically, we weren't asking them to put
Ah,
any
I
money
see.
down or card info yet, but we were at trying to get a quantity count. And so by that, we were able to understand that, the typical person wants to get 3.5, or I think it was like 3.4 totems. And, we were able to estimate what our quantity and demand could be, because we had that little extra information of this is how many they say they want, with the full information on what it will cost and what it will do.
And so did you test the pricing
Yeah, the
before, or
pricing the pricing was a big thing
that
that
was a
I
stroke
spent a
of
lot
luck?
of time on in early stages as well. During those first few months when we were building Totem, it was all on design, 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 and then talking to customers. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten from a friend of mine and mentor named Matthew is, in early stages, it's very important to do the things that don't scale, because that's what sets you apart from the others. And
Yep.
secondarily, any excuse not to talk to your customers is a bad excuse in early stages. So every day
Yep.
for about 4 months, I would spend at least 2 hours a day literally just talking to people in the festival scene, big fans of the scene, big participants, over DM. And it's something that people were totally willing to talk about because it's something they love and is a big part of their life. And so during those conversations, I learned more about how they view this problem, They're hearing their stories about when they think this would have saved their day, saved their experience. Sometimes it was fun. Sometimes it was more serious. Sometimes people were like, with this product, like a friend of mine who's no longer with us might actually be here now. So there's a range of stories, but that's the thing. Everybody has a
Oh
story
wow.
when it comes to being lost, and people want to talk about them because it's such an emotional experience. So doing all that, but then also talking through the pricing strategy as well was something that I did with the customers every single day. Talking through, what do you think this could be priced at? What would you be willing to pay for it? But then more importantly, what do you think would be a no-brainer price for everyone that you know? Because those are different questions. The second you use
Hmm.
that phrase no brainer,
Those are different questions.
they're going to give you, in my opinion, a more
Yeah.
real answer. Because when you just ask them, what do you think this
Hmm.
should be priced? What would you be willing to pay for it? People are just default inclined to want to please others, especially when you're talking face to face. And people are hesitant to give you the real answer. And so they might theoretically
Yeah.
tell you what they think
Yeah.
other
That's a
people
good
might
point.
pay for it. But, well, is that actually what they would be willing to put down for it to make it? So I think using that no brainer term is really important. And so what we came down to is, many
Hmm.
people were like, "Hey, I would buy it if it was under $300." But when I was like, "But what's a no-brainer? Like, what is the price point that you think that everyone who goes to a festival would buy it at this point?" Because that was our objective. We wanted it to spread quickly, not just like try to get our biggest
Hmm.
margin at the beginning. And so that's what. So the research pointed us to, man, if it could be under $60, then that would be a no-brainer, and that's what we were going for.
These conversations you said were
Mhm.
online in a
Mostly on
DM. Where
Instagram.
were these
Yeah, mostly on
conversations?
Instagram DMs. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
the big, big important thing is to think about it from the beginning. I was approaching it like building a community. And that's the difference between building an audience versus building a community, because a community is built on actual relationships. It's not just trying to get people to hear you, it's also trying to hear them. And so it's not just one to many. I was in there in the DMs for hours every day for months, building genuine one on one relationships with people in our target customer audience and in this marketplace. It was easy for me because I love festivals too. This is like one of my favorite things in the world. And I love people who go to festivals, and I love talking to
Yeah.
people who go to festivals about festivals because they're like some of the best moments that we all have in our life. There's such great stories involved with it. So it
Yeah.
was easy because I was part of it. But that's the big important thing.
Part of the success is probably because there is such a good founder market fit, and it takes all the work out of selling, because you're not really trying to sell. You genuinely want to solve a problem for this audience, and you connect with the audience already.
Yeah,
uh, a lot of people try and pick an idea where they don't connect with
mm-hmm.
the ICP at all. They just figured out an idea that might be worth selling, but they're not as passionate.
The important point to
um,
focus on, because in early stages, when we were telling people about this like friend finding, peer finding device that can work without cell service or anything, so many of our early conversations with investors who weren't willing to cut us a check, by the way, they were just willing to critique us and give us advice, were saying, why aren't you selling this to like the defense industry? They're the ones with all the money, and like
yeah.
direction finding for them is such a big thing. Like you could make a lot of money there. I don't know anything about the military or the defense.
Yeah.
It would take me years to understand how to even sell to that market,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of
Yeah.
wisdom to that. Like you have to sell to people that you understand, because ideally you are those people. Ideally you are creating something that solves a problem that you have.
And so you would basically hang out with them on Instagram, build that camaraderie and relationship, and then eventually open up about what
Yeah,
you're
I mean, it
trying
would
to
just
do,
inevitably come up.
and
I
kind of
wasn't
have that
trying to hide
conversation.
it or like being insincere about it
Yeah.
all. They saw what we were building on Totem, and they recognized why we were
Yeah.
doing it. And so all we had to talk about was, I mean, it's such an easy conversation to have, and just wanting to hear their experience, whether this is genuinely a problem that they feel they would be willing to pay to solve. Because validating the problem is so important. And of course, it's very easy to delude yourself into thinking that it's a very brilliant idea that everyone would be willing to pay for because you're like, well, I would pay for it. And we're all very good at convincing ourselves into things like that, you know?
Yep.
But it's all about validating
Yep.
that the problem is worth solving. And a good frame to keep in mind for that is the mental model of the three P's for problem, which is got to make sure your problem is personal, pervasive, and painful. Then you have to make sure that you're doing it for the right
Mm.
market. And so once the right people,
Mm-hmm.
because many people can have the same problem. As we see, if you go onto any of our viral posts,
Yep.
the comments are filled with people saying, man, I need this thing for my kids. I need this thing to track my dog. I need to take it to Disneyland. I need to
Yep.
staple this to my husband's forehead when he's at Home Depot because I just can't keep track of him. Like everybody and their mother has a idea of who this could be used for, and because everybody knows what it's like to be lost. It's literally the most universal, maybe the most universal problem faced by everyone who's ever lived in humanity dating back to the dawn of time. And so, of course, we could just say, well,
Yep.
great, everyone knows what it's like to be lost, so let's make something that will solve this problem for everyone all over the world, right? And in
Everyone.
many ways, that's what everyone wanted on these comments. I would get messages. I still remember so vividly one night at like midnight, someone messaged me on LinkedIn telling me that I was an idiot for marketing this product to the market that I do, because the real market that I need to market it to is firefighters and fire departments. And we would just get messages like that all the time from people who are like, why are you doing this for a demographic that's fun? I'm over here and it's serious business. And it's kind of like, I get lost too. Why don't you see me like you see them? And so, there was a lot of pressure to
Yeah.
expand horizontally and lose our focus of our market because of the virality. But that's why it's so important to not just focus on the problem you're solving, but who you're going to solve the problem for to bring even more focus into it. Because focus is
Mm-hmm.
made from making hard decisions, and decisions, if you break down that word, what it means to decide, it's the root of the word is side, like regicide, genocide, homicide, it's to kill. So decide really means to kill off options, right? And so deciding, focus, isn't about
Mm.
saying yes to something, it's about saying no to many, many things. And you have to be willing to ruthlessly say no over and over and over if you want to keep the kind of focus that makes you so relevant.
And one easy way to find that focus is to know yourself better as
Yeah, and that's
founders. You can always go horizontal. Once you have the
yeah, and
technology, you can
honestly,
always
that
go
self
horizontal.
knowledge is really important. That's why I think the one most important piece of advice that I would probably give to founders outside of all this free marketing consulting that we've done on this podcast is, dude, you like build a meditation practice. You have to know how to meditate. If I had not been
Yeah.
meditating daily for 3.5 years now coming into this, I would have lost my sauce and gone insane and not been able to deal with all of this, especially with how quickly things spread and how quickly we had to scale and adjust all of our timelines. It's just so, so valuable because it's not just about controlling your own emotions and clearing your own mind, but it is about that self knowledge and making yourself feel more comfortable with being able to hear those soft messages that come from deep inside you.
Totally. I've been a founder for almost 17 years now, and I started meditating
Mm-hmm.
maybe 7 years ago. The early part of my journey was absolutely crazy. As a founder, you have to deal with so many problems, and there's just so much pressure.
The more successful and the bigger it gets, the more opinions
Yeah.
you have to deal with. And like your judgment is your
Yeah.
number one tool as a founder. And you have to do whatever it takes to keep
Yep.
your judgment in a clear place. And that's a hard thing, especially in early stages when you're also an individual contributor and need to pump out deliverables as well.
And that judgment has to also go against the
Yes.
advice a lot of times, like in your case, like people screaming for you to take it to a certain market, and investors telling you what to do and what not to do. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you don't have that kind of
Yeah,
clarity,
I still remember very
it's
clearly
very easy
one
to deal.
investor who was maybe the most hardcore about, and he even went to festivals a lot. He was one of the few investors that I was able to talk to that went to music festivals constantly. And he was really hardcore. He's like, look,
Mm.
man, I'll just be real with you. I love the concept, real problem, but it's a stupid product. Like it can't be hardware. No one wants hardware, and definitely no one wants another wearable. It has to be an app. Everyone has their phone. It has to be. If you come back to me in a couple of months with an MVP of an app, then maybe I'll be down. And he was like so hard on it. And this was about 2 weeks before we went viral. And I had a call with him the week after, and he was like, "Hey man, just want to say it makes so much sense why you went viral. Like you're right. Like I hate my screen. I use all Sunday. Sundays for the last month. I don't even let it's a screen free day for me because it's so much better for my mental health and my energy and my focus, etc. And it's just so interesting how, once there's like that level of validation from others,
People
you see
slept
it.
in.
And it's interesting because he was even giving me that advice while he was living a dissonant reality from that advice, while he was taking days off of screens on the weekend because he recognized how important it was for mental health and focus. And so, of course, once we're talking about actually going to these festivals and these events, they're so ephemeral and fleeting. They're over before you know it. You anticipate them and look forward to them for so long. And while they're happening, they're so beautiful. And you meet such amazing people. The last thing you want in those spaces and those experiences to get yanked out of it by something happening on a screen, whether that's yours or another person.
Had I not heard the story and just heard the product pitch, especially me not being from, I go to a lot of conferences, but I don't go to music festivals. The last one was way back, Brian Adams show in Bangalore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense to me. But when I heard the story, it
The
made
big
sense.
thing as well. I mean, there's a lot of network effects and other reasons that I think led to the virality, but on a smaller level,
Hmm.
um, I think the screen or commitment to being screen free and even on top of that, app free is a big part of it. And we didn't totally understand how important that was until South by Southwest. But speaking to people there in the Creative
Hmm.
Industries Expo, where we were surrounded by an ocean of AI companies and VR companies. It was like AI, VR, VR, AI, AI, VR,
Yeah.
VR, AI, the whole way down the aisle until you got to this little corner booth of these people from Chattanooga, Tennessee, dancing to music. And we just had these things around our neck. And people would
Yeah.
say, like, ask how it worked. We'd explain how it worked. And then they would say, well, like, you know, how much does it cost? Like, you probably want a subscription. We're like, no subscription. You pay for it, it's yours. In fact, we'll even push free software updates once you buy it. And people are like, well, there's got to be an app, right? And we're like, actually, no apps, no screens. Like, this
Yeah.
is it right here. And you could just see people like their mind
Yeah.
change and their shoulders relax and then have this level of relief because it's so real, uh, in this era of
Yeah.
trying to create things that like augment the real world or like build meaningful layers on top of the real world. This is all about helping you immerse more into the real world and not distracting you from it.
There are very little products that, especially in the tech space, that come without being connected to the cloud. So, in that sense, it's very refreshing to see a product that is not connected to the cloud, and you hook up to another
Yeah.
subscription. So, I'm sure you've got this competition and differentiation, right? You have like AirTag. I think there's
Yes.
something called Type. How does Totem differentiate itself in
Mhm.
this space? Is it because of the segment you're entering?
Yeah, there's a few
How are
layers
you
to it.
differentiating?
One is on the most basic level, what you just got at right there, which is our focus on a specific market. AirTag and Tile and some of these other ones, of course, are doing the approach where they were like, we're trying to just solve this problem for everyone. And so our focus on doing something that's specifically
Hmm.
made for a specific group of people is where it begins. But then beyond that, those specific solutions, as you mentioned, those all require a connection to your phone. AirTags themselves don't have to get a connection to like the cell network to report their location, but your phone still has to get a connection to see that location. And so it comes up with problems in congested
Yeah.
areas. So there's just like some technical issues in congested networks at these festivals because, of course, this was the big problem. Even if your phone doesn't get stolen, the second you're in a crowd of more than 30, 40,000 people, your cell service is super unreliable at best if you can get anything out. And so they're just not built for this very specific use case on a certain level. But then, of course, even if you do have cell service, it
Mhm.
requires you accessing an app and using your screen. And in those environments, that's one of the last things that anyone wants to do. I mean, even sober people at these environments, there's so many beautiful things going on all around you and on stage. The last thing you want to do is like get in your phone and navigate through an app and then hold it up and try to find people. And many people aren't sober at the events. And that was another reason why we
Yeah.
designed it the way we did, was we kind of anticipated people being cognitively inhibited. And thus we designed it to make it work as if it were make it designed for as if we were designing it for like a 5-year old, right? You know, they're just three button whole thing, and the main button is the big glowing crystal.
Yeah.
You know, touch the pretty crystal. That's how you
Yeah.
bond them. That's how you can change the crystal color. And that's how you manage all of your peers as well. Is just through interacting with the crystal. Like all the main interactions are there. So, the simplicity, but
Mm.
a big thing is the screen free aspect, because that's just so important. I think it's something that's increasing in culture today. Phones, especially with TikTok and social media as it is today, make people anxious. They really do. It's strongly
Yeah.
correlated with depression and even suicide rates all over the world. And especially in these moments of immersive beauty, the last thing you want to do is have to pull up your phone to look at an app and maybe see a message from your ex. And it just totally ruined your whole experience in that moment. So, the connection to music, the market, the screen free aspect, and just our connection to our audience, building it for our audience is big. But that said, Tile and AirTag are great companies and are doing a great job solving this problem. And we have a great relationship, myself and Chase, with the co-founder of Tile. He follows Totem Tuesday, and we
Mm.
just had a call with him about a month ago. And he gave us all kind of advice for about a half hour or an hour and a half on the phone. And he's a big fan of what we're building here. So it just goes to show we're solving a problem that everyone in the entire world faces. There is more than enough for everybody. And so
Yeah.
when you do it, when you have enough focus and you go narrow enough and really design with those people in mind, you can carve out a beautiful company.
There definitely is a big enough market. Yeah, for sure. We've already spoken a lot about marketing, go to
Yeah.
market. Any specific advice you have for early stage
Yes.
founders?
I have a couple of things to add, actually, I guess. I can give you a little bit more. One, and I've hinted at this, but just to put it
Yeah.
explicitly, try to use as few words as possible when you're describing your product and your company to people, and try to use as
Mm.
simple and small of words as possible. If it takes a paragraph, make it into a sentence. If you're saying a sentence, make it into a phrase. If you're saying a phrase, make it into a word. If you're using a word, you might be able to just express it through design. So simplicity is your friend, particularly as it pertains to messaging. You don't need to explain everything about your product to people. We even ruthlessly
Yeah.
simplified a lot of things about our product. There were a lot of things that features we planned on building into it early on that we ended up nixing because it just was too complicated to explain to people. And because of that, we were able to get it down to a 3-step process of how it works. And that's another piece of advice to founders is people love threes, and a 3-step process is so important. Our 3-step process,
Yeah.
because we ruthlessly cut out features, intentionally making it more simple, was just first, step one, bond with your tribe. Step two, find your tribe. Step three, vibe with your tribe. And vibing is what it's doing right here, right now. And so getting it down to that language, but then also
Mm.
using language that is like kind of all tied into a brand atmosphere together and relevant to your market. This concept of the tribe, like what we were mentioning there, and even just calling it bonding, for example, is really important. That aspect of emotional connection is really
Mm.
important with the product. That's why we have the 4 facets in the crystal, even as I mentioned in the logo is the crystal and the compass, and in that crystal is the totem T, and even within the T divides the crystal into 4 quadrants, and those represent the 4 peers that you can bond with. your friends. And then as you find them at the event,
Mm.
their light actually collects into your crystal when they're nearby. And so you can actually kind of collect your friends into the crystal, and then it's hanging over your heart. And it's like all about this loving relationship. There's just all these layers to it, you know? And so have fun with it, really get creative, and think about the words you're using and try to create your own vernacular when you're describing your product and your brand and your audience to everybody.
Nice. That is such a good advice coming at like thinking about how you're
Mm-hmm.
going to explain your product
That's the biggest thing.
and
Yeah,
thinking
and
about it ahead
that's
of
one of the
time.
biggest things that I used to help founders with when I was doing go-to-market consulting, especially when they were in very early stage. You know, you work so intently on your product all the time, you forget what it's like to know nothing
Yeah.
about it. And that was a big reason why founders would bring me in to
Yeah.
help them in the first place, was just to clarify their messaging from the perspective of someone who hasn't been working on it all the time. But it's very, very hard to do
Yeah.
because, again, it comes down to killing off options. And it kills us as founders because we're like, but I put so much thought into all of these other little things. It's important that they understand it, but it's not important that they understand it. It's
Yeah.
important to you that you talk about it because you want them to understand how much work and effort you put into it. And, you know, it's just, you need to recognize.
Yeah. That, and then also sometimes, like for example, today I was on a B2B SaaS
Mhm.
product. It was a sales tool. This startup has three products by now
Ah,
and one pricing page. So for a product page, they have three products, but for a pricing page, they had one pricing page. And when I landed on the pricing page, it was so hard to understand how the price
yeah.
went and what's. So yeah, I totally agree. Messaging, if you don't think through along the lines of how you're going to explain things, you end
Yeah,
up with a very soupy product.
the words have to come first.
That's
They're
hard to
so
sell.
important. I think a lot of founders are design minded, and so they'll oftentimes, for example, just to give one small example, they'll build the website and then they'll figure out what to write on it. You have to start with the words
Yeah.
because words are what sell things. Period. You know? And so you
Yeah.
have to begin with the words and then
Yeah.
flesh everything out from those central words, you know? How you describe it to someone who knows nothing about it, how you describe it to someone who knows a little bit about it, you know, just like all throughout the familiarity process, but then also contextualizing what it means to them. And like the pricing is a really important thing, like you said, like people have to understand right away what the pricing is. And that's something that we built in from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that was a big reason for, I think, the viral spread was because we built in network effects directly into the pricing because, you know, the totem gets more valuable the more people you know that have one, the more of your friends that have one. But it also gets
Yeah.
more affordable the more of your friends that buy one. You know, the price to get two
Mm.
is higher per compass than the price to get four. And so, you know, this approach to network effects, and that's what I meant earlier when I was talking about how special it is to have a marketer involved in the product design from the beginning, because you can just work all these network
Yeah.
effects into the company and the pricing structure and how the product itself is designed in a lot of ways that you can't do if you're coming in to market a product once it's mostly finished or completely finished.
Yeah. Man, I'm definitely gonna pick your brain more at some point. We can chat for hours. You said you had multiple posts after that original post. Did you kind of crack the code, or in terms of getting things out, and
Yeah, I mean,
any
we
lessons
didn't do
there
the
for the
same thing
audience?
every time. The posts were different, but I can look
Yeah.
at them now with hindsight and talk about what helped.
Hmm.
But for example, the second big post that we went viral was me actually explaining this from the floor of South by Southwest. It was the second to last day. It was actually the day before you and I met,
Hmm.
Vish. And it went viral on
Oh.
TikTok. That was our first time going viral on TikTok. And the next morning, people showed up like, "Oh my god, I saw you on my phone this morning. I wanted to come down here and check you out." You know, especially people like Gen Z. Um, so the big thing is, of course, at least what's worked for us, right? It's different for everybody. But something that worked
Yep.
for us is
Everyone, yeah.
simplicity, right? This is a common theme. It's one of our core values at Totem. You know, we have four core values: love, unity, beauty, simplicity. I'd end up talking about beauty and simplicity the most, I think. Uh, and so, but the simplicity is so important, and we try to do that even in the content, right? It's not overly edited. That original reel was literally me holding a couple on this white desk here in my home office, and it was just a 6 second loop, and it just said "Friend Finding Compass for Festivals" on the screen, and that was it. You know, you have to communicate one simple idea with each piece of content, and then communicate that single idea through as few words as possible. And that has been the really, really helpful thing for us throughout this whole
Hmm.
process. Of course, all the time that we spent making it look beautiful and on the design helps a lot. And it being
Yeah.
hardware helps a lot because it's something that we could have never done with an app or anything on a screen because you can't take a photo of an app. At least, you know, I mean, you can, but
Or
it's not the
keep
same.
recording.
Like, you can't take a real world photo of an app. You can't take a video of someone. Like, someone can't share a selfie of themselves with the app. You know, or, I mean, maybe they could, but why would they? You
Yeah.
know. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, like designing it to be alluring. We've had so many people reach out and say, "That looks so cool. Like, I want that. I don't even care about the compassing thing. Like, I just want to have that to wear, like as jewelry or as an accessory." You know, and I think if you can build product that
Yeah.
people feel that strongly about, just in terms of the beauty and the aesthetic, then you're helping yourself out a lot.
Yeah, that was my first feedback where we met as
Yeah,
well. When I saw the flicker, I was like, I can just
yeah.
freaking wear this at a conference. That'll be worth
It
it.
catches people's eye for sure. We were on the plane and everything, and people are just like, people's heads turn as you walk past.
Yeah.
Especially because, I mean, in a moment like this, it's even more viewable because you can tell that it's reacting just to my voice. So I started wearing this to like pitches
Yeah.
early on, especially if there were multiple people pitching in a row. I would wear this up and treat it like the prize, right? I would get up there and it would be on, and I would talk about it for a moment and
Yeah.
about how how
Yeah.
beautiful it is, etc. And then I would turn it off and take it away from them because I would be like, but you know, right now I know it's really beautiful and distracting, and so I'm going to turn it off now because I want you to focus on me. You know, and then I would turn it off, and then of course they just wanted to see it on again, right? And then they wanted to put it on at the end. So yeah, there is some aspect to just like how
Yeah.
it looks hanging on your chest, and that's why it was really, really important to us to make sure that it was something that people genuinely wanted to wear. Because if you think about the use at these
Yeah.
events, you only actually need to compass and find people a very small percentage of the time. So then the question is, well,
Yeah.
what are they doing with the device outside of that time? Are they putting it in their pocket, in their bag, you know?
Yeah.
Or is it like lighting up beautifully on their chest?
Yeah.
Because one of those means very different things for what it will cost us to market the product versus others.
Yeah. I think to me the product is so married with the demographic it's built for and the place where they're at. It's just beautiful. Yeah. Are there any plans to take this B2B?
Yes. So obviously, where we began is building this device specifically for consumers in mind. But our mission at Totem, more broadly than just this product, is to make live events around the world safer, more immersive, and more beautiful than ever before.
Hmm.
So this first product from us is a great step in that direction, particularly making them more immersive because of the screen-free thing. And of course, make people feel safer and more free. But what we can really do, or what it takes for us to uh, pursue that mission on a much grander scale, is working with the events themselves. Because once we start integrating our tech with events around the world, the things we can do to make them safer and more immersive and more beautiful become or tenfold multiplied. So we're already in talks with event organizers, production companies, and like major international entertainment brands that sponsor a lot of these events right now
Hmm.
as we look forward to integrating in our tech with the events next year. So that is our big focus for 2025. But right now, we are all focused on rolling out this product to everybody all around the world that everyone is so excited about, and making sure they have an amazing customer experience.
Yeah.
But over time, we are thinking about, or we are planning to move into that space because so that is our plan and that's what we're working toward. We've had a lot of conversations with people in the events industry, both domestically and abroad. But yeah, it's going to be a big year here for Totem coming into 2025. In fact, just in 2 weeks from now, our director of operations will be in Belgium at Tomorrowland, which is the
Mm.
world's largest, biggest, most famous music festival, doing some tech testing with their tech integration team. And so we are actively right now scheduling all kind of pilots and trials with events and brands all over the world ahead of this rollout in 2025.
Very exciting. Yeah, a lot of use cases also gives probably potentially the event hosts a lot of data around audience movement, and I'm sure there are tons of use cases that you can think of when you know
Yeah.
where people are.
Yeah, that's a big one, and that is definitely the one that everyone is most excited about. I would say the two pieces from the event organizer side that they're most excited about is one, the crowd animations, because of course that's beautiful and shareable and everything. But then the bigger one is being able to understand how your crowd is flowing around the event at scale is something that they've never really been able to do before. And we're not talking about personal data here. We're not talking about selling in people's individual details.
Yeah.
We're talking about helping these events understand how people are moving around their event in a way that they never have before. Because, currently, just for an anecdote example, let's say, Bud Light pays $1 million to sponsor a stage at Coachella. Coachella right now can't actually tell them exactly how many people went to that stage throughout the weekend.
Yeah.
They have no idea exactly how many people used these bathrooms versus those bathrooms. So they can't employ a data driven approach to improve. They don't know exactly how many people are in different areas. So they can't employ a data driven approach to distributing and managing their grounds crew based on the way the crowds are flowing. So much of it is still done on line of sight and walkie talkies. So understanding how people are moving around your event can have so many benefits for the organizers, but also trickle down a lot of benefits and value to the attendees as well.
Yeah. And one follow-up question I have is, will the attendees be able to take this as a souvenir?
That will be up to their event organizer. Yeah. So if not, you can take it up with them. Yeah.
Exciting times ahead. Well, we can chat for hours, I'm
Of
sure.
course. Of course. Yeah.
But it
Maybe
was
maybe we'll
lovely.
have a round two in a few
Maybe we'll
months.
have around two. Once
Yeah.
you've maybe raised a few and had some time to relax.
Yeah, I would love a vacation. The last weekend, or not this past 2 weekends ago, was my first time taking 2 days consecutively off since February.
That's
Yeah,
a lot.
looking forward to the down season. I know for a lot of companies, like the holidays, November,
Yeah,
December, January is a big time, but for us, that is going to be
a
time to
downtime.
rest and reflect and try to process how dramatically all of our lives have changed this year.
Nice. Well, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for taking the time, and it was so much fun. Uh, and we'll do this soon again.
Thank you so much, Vish. It was a pleasure. I'd be happy to come back sometime.
If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. See you in the next episode.